Welcome back, my Dungaree friends. Today we're talking about actually finding things that will help us respect our husbands naturally, having the eyes to see what God has instilled in our husbands. I have some stories to share. I'll share an illustration of that in the video from my own life of how I learned to see what my husband has in terms of wisdom. Not that I didn't see anything, but there are so many blind spots in our minds and our hearts as wives, for men as well in different areas, but for us as wives, we need to have our eyes open. This is about learning to see those things and really taking His wisdom seriously. So how is your new year going? I have made 1 or 2 resolutions. I'm not so much a resolutions person because to me the new year is a construct. I see it as an opportunity to start afresh, psychological start, I like to work towards goals such as getting up a bit earlier this year. I would like to be a bit more consistent. I wrote a blog post about what a good virtuous woman does with all this extra time she has when she gets up early and how it affects her whole day and her whole life and what a blessing it is to her husband. So that is something I wrote to inspire myself and hopefully you ladies as well. It's over on my blog. The link will be in the description box below. I'm talking about how I learned to take my husband's advice more seriously because it's something that I didn't realize or think about that much until a couple of experiences taught me that I wasn't actually taking everything he said seriously. I know he's a human, he's fallible, but this seems to be what most wives latch onto. He is fallible, so we question and we doubt what he says. But I want to show you how I learned to lean in the other direction of trusting what he says and actually taking it serious. So what would often happen is my husband suggests something to me. I tell him I'm going to do this and this and that, and he would respond with some cautioning advice or suggest a different way of doing it. Because he wasn't making it an instruction, I thought, well, I can take it or leave it. I would sometimes take the advice, but sometimes not. What would happen is pretty much all the times I disregarded what he said, I discovered why he'd cautioned me. And I learned that he was right. And there was something I hadn't thought about. I'll illustrate that with a little story. One of those incidents that I can remember quite clearly. Basically, one day I was busy setting up the kids' school area and I was thinking of some ways to put things on the wall so that they can see everything displayed more clearly. And I had this little chalkboard that was framed in a wooden frame, so it was a mobile chalkboard, and I wanted to put it against the wall. Showed my husband that I'm going to take some panel pins, these little pins, and knock it into the wall and hang it on that. I thought that was a novel idea, really simple and easy to do. He said that you can't do that, and he didn't explain why. So I said, oh, and we didn't really discuss it, and I just went ahead because I didn't want to hear why I can't do it. I wanted to do it. I tend to be a bit impatient. If I get an idea, I want to do it right away and not have to wait to get all the right materials and everything. And I think that by just doing it right away and being optimistic, it will somehow all come together. Because I'm a very optimistic person, I tend to put a lot of value in optimism. Optimism does not change logic. Logic is what it is. You can't change it by being optimistic. So that's what I learned. I went to go hammer those little pins into the wall and they just kept falling out and the pieces of the wall kept coming out with it. So I was breaking the wall and this idea was not working. And I felt very foolish, of course, because I could have listened to my husband and not damaged the wall. So that's just a silly little incident, a little illustration, a situation that I could have listened to my husband and been the wiser for it. I think many of us trust our own wisdom above anybody else's. And that is the hard thing for us as wives to do, is to subject our minds and our hearts to another person's. If we don't trust that that person knows and that their wisdom will be sufficient to carry you, you will struggle to listen, and you will take every opportunity not to listen if you can, or if you think it's fine not to, or you're convinced yours is better. That is the natural human state, is to trust our own instincts above anybody else's, because who would have our best interests in mind more than ourselves? As it turns out, we are not separate from God. We are not separate from the body of Christ. We all operate together. And God has clearly, multiple times in the Bible said that wives are to be in subjection to their husbands. There is no question about what that means. If that's what he says, it means he has foreknown these things. He has thought about it. He knows what is best. It's very simple, but we make it complicated. Hence this channel. Many people took offense to the video I posted about why your husband is more intelligent than you are. And after having posted the video, I realized that what I was really trying to say was God has given him the wisdom. Intellect is irrespective of wisdom. A man can be very wise, but not particularly intelligent or educated. Those things are separate and they don't necessarily correlate. The worldly, humanistic mind correlates education, intellect, academics with wisdom. That you've achieved the highest state of mankind to be educated and smart. I think that is why this video was seen as so offensive, because how could you say that women are lesser beings than men? Well, what I was also saying was that there are many women who are more intelligent than many men, but by and large, what you will find is a woman will choose a man that is smarter than herself, just instinctually. She's not walking around with a checklist or doing IQ tests on every man, but instinctively she is looking for a man that she can respect and that she can admire. That is the natural way of a woman's love for a man. She wants to admire him. And the man she falls in love with is the man she admires. And that would be a man who is smarter or wiser than her, in her eyes. Usually that admiration, that adoration is lost over time because, we betray each other in little ways or we hurt each other. And, it chisels away at those good thoughts, those good intentions, that good image we had of each other. What I'm getting at is that 99% of the time a woman marries a man smarter than herself. She wants that. That's naturally what you want. You want to know that the man who fathers your children is someone you can trust. You don't want to have to second guess this man around every corner, even though that is what many women do anyway. And that brings me to the next point, which is we always talk about men's egos, how men have these egos and they need to feed their ego, and it's also silly. But the fact is, women have egos too. And we don't really talk about that, but we want to feed our egos as well. And that is why we take offense to videos about men being intelligent or your husband being more intelligent than you. It's your ego being offended. You want to be the smartest person in the house. You want to have an inflated sense of self. That is natural. I'm not saying you are. Me too. I know exactly what it is, what it feels like. It's the flesh. We're seeking ourselves. We're seeking our own. We want to all be kings and queens. We want to lift ourselves up. And that is not what Christ came to teach us. He came to teach us to be servants. That is the heart and the mind of Christ. So as a wife, in our calling, in our nature, we are called to be reverent towards our husbands. So that's a wonderful place and a wonderful setting in which to demonstrate the heart of Christ and the heart of the bride towards Christ as well. So don't let your ego get in the way of admiring your husband. If it's hard for you to admire your husband, you probably are seeking to build your own ego. That really is just another word for pride and self-seeking, self-love. We have to lay those things down. And that is not to say you're left with nothing. Oh, now I've laid my ego down and I'm left with nothing. That is the beginning of finding what it is to be a woman, what it is to be soft and sweet and responsive and submissive and kind and full of life and optimism, being the nurturer, the emotional and physical nurturer of your husband. And that is an all-consuming job. It is a great task and it requires all our faculties. And in the process, we grow and we blossom into the most beautiful form of womanhood possible. So whenever you're fighting for your ego, take a moment in the middle of an argument with your husband and you think, why am I arguing this point? Do I really care about the subject? Or am I fighting for something to do with status? Am I fighting for power, acknowledgement, building my ego? It's so often the case. If you're really honest with yourself, you'll find that a lot of the time you want to be acknowledged as right because that makes you the one who is right, and you don't feel humbled by being proven wrong. The beautiful thing about being in a submissive relationship with your husband is you're not beaten down. You don't feel like you're undertrodden and disregarded. I get the sense this is what a lot of you who come to this channel think is going on, that you have this awful feeling of unworthiness the whole time, and that you have to beat yourself up every day just to stay in submission. If that's what you think, and that's what you want to think, then I can't say anything else to you. If you want to hear about this from someone who knows, it is the most fulfilling and uplifting experiences for a woman to have. The effect of being submissive and admiring your husband and respecting his input and his thoughts, his knowledge and experience, putting it above your own, has the profound effect of softening his heart towards you and making him cherish you in a way that you would never have expected. If you haven't tried it, you need to try it. The results are like this. If you're forcing it, you might not see the results you hope for. If it's real, if it's genuine, you're genuinely giving over, putting the crown on his head, you will see it. But if you want to be acknowledged for your wisdom over your husband's, or you want him to see your point for the sake of elevating yourself in his eyes, you are going to end up miserable in the relationship. You are not going to find a kinship with your husband. He will feel irritated by you. He will feel dishonored by you. And even though he won't acknowledge it verbally, he might even deny it, it is what you are doing. You will sense it. You will sense it in your relationship. You won't be able to get close to him as you want to. And he will always keep you at a distance. You will always be seeking a way to put him down or to argue a point in order that you can feel good about your ideas. What I've learned through each of those experiences is that trying to win, because I believe I have a good point and that he's not seeing it, first of all, is disregarding his wisdom. If I'm disregarding what he's saying, in my heart of hearts, I'm thinking that he's not getting it. When I've really taken a step back and thought about it, I realized that he's seeing what I'm saying and more. He is 5 steps ahead of me. If you can start thinking about your husband like that, your relationship will blossom. It is about what you see. This is not about duping yourself. This is not about tricking yourself into thinking good things about someone that has no good things. This is about seeing. God will not command something that is not possible, or that is not good, or that is not safe. A lot of people point towards the story of Sarah and Abraham. So let's go have a look at it. And what does it actually say? Genesis 21 verse 12. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of the bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So the story here is that God promised Abraham a great nation, but Abraham had no children, and Sarah, his wife, was barren. And they got old, and still there was no child. But they kept believing. But at one point, Sarah got desperate, and she said to Abraham, take my servant woman, Hagar, and sleep with her, and have a son with her, so that through my servant we can fulfill God's promise, and this son can be mine through my bondwoman. Abraham did it. That bondwoman Hagar bore a son called Ishmael. There was the son, but it was not the son of the promise. It was not the son promised by God to Abraham. Eventually, when Sarah did fall pregnant miraculously in her old age and bore a son, Sarah despised her handmaiden with this imposter son that she herself was responsible for, and wanted to kick her out with the son. But Abraham loved this boy. It was his boy, Ishmael, his only child for all these years. So Sarah insisted, and then the Lord spoke to Abraham and said this to him, that listen to Sarah, send this woman away with her son. This boy will not inherit Isaac's inheritance, which was true son. And many women point to this and say, see, God actually told Abraham to listen to his wife. He wasn't going to, and God actually confirmed it. Well, First of all, there is no instruction saying that husbands should listen to their wives. This is a very specific scenario in which Abraham was clearly going against God's promise. God promised Abraham multiple times. He told Abraham, I will give you a son through Sarah. Sarah is going to bear the son. And it seemed impossible. They were getting old. She was barren. There was just no hope or evidence of this happening ever. And God kept saying this, and it wasn't happening. So you can see how Abraham began to set his hopes on Ishmael. The thing is, Abraham was attached to Ishmael and loved him because he was his son. God had to push him to that point of sending away that child. Abraham was just clinging to the son that he loved, and God had to sever it. And that's a hard thing. I mean, anyone can understand that. God was just being consistent with his promise. But what I also want to point out is, because this happened, doesn't change God's design for the wife and the husband. God spoke to Abraham. Do you see this? God spoke to Abraham. Abraham didn't listen to his wife. God came and spoke to him and told him to listen to his wife. In the same way, if your husband is clearly violating the will of God, not many of us get words from God, but let's say there is some clear promise God gave to your husband told you about it, you kept it in your hearts for years, and then your husband starts to deviate from it. Is it your job to push him back into keeping the promise? No. You can remind him, but God will step in and speak to your husband. You need to trust in God to do that. And I know it can be hard because not many of us hear from God. But I think the real problem is not so much hearing from God as it is fear. We live with a lot of fear. If we haven't walked trusting God in things, we don't have that experience to know that we can just trust him, because we've lived in fear. So we never stepped out to see what it actually is like. When you take a risk, there are so many things, even in a natural, ordinary life. There are many risks, we get married, we have children, we get old, we get sick, all these risks of just being alive. And if you live carefully and fearfully, as if it's all up to you, and if you don't hold it all together, it's all going to fall apart, you think that you're the one holding it all together, and you will never see how it is God holding it all together, if that makes sense. But coming back to the main point, we need to see. The simple thing is to pray and ask God to help us see. Something that really stood out to me was in Genesis 3 verse 17. Having just spoken about how God said, listen to the voice of your wife, to Abraham, let's look at a general application that applies to all of mankind. Genesis 3 verse 17. God has discovered that they ate from the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and he is dealing out curses to all three parties. And he says to Adam, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. That is what happened when Adam listened to the voice of his wife. Both were in transgression, both man and woman. They each did something different. She listened to the serpent, she was deceived, then she convinced her husband, and her husband gave in to her because no doubt she was charming and sweet, and he thought he really loved her, and he was willing to set aside good reason to be in good company with her. The general principle is, wives, listen to your husbands, not husbands, listen to your wives. That is the main essence of the message for today. I want to read from Genesis 21 verse 19. Interestingly, this story follows directly from the verse I read about Abraham listening to his wife Sarah, and he has to cast out Hagar and Ishmael. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and he sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs, and she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. So today, We want to ask God to open our eyes. We can pray for it and He will do it. He will give us wisdom and the sight to see the things we need to see. God opened Hagar's eyes. All along the well was there. The water was right there. So many times in life, we sit and struggle with meager things and having want and not having the things we need because we're trying to do it all on our own, and we think we know everything we need to know to do the thing. But no, we need to lean on God. We need to ask Him for the wisdom and to see and to humble ourselves and say, I don't know how this works. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know why I must submit, or I don't know how exactly you made this, but I want to do it your way. And then ask Him for that wisdom so you can see and He can open your eyes. Once you see that, once you see what's in your husband and what God has placed there, that is the image of God and the wisdom and the leadership needed to lead you, you will rest easy. Everything in you will just relax. You will be content and happy. You will follow Him. You will just see to the things you're responsible for, which is the children, the house, and being a good supporter and comforter and uplifter for your husband. I mean, those are such simple, sweet duties for a woman. If only we could just stick to those things, we would be so happy and we would be pleasing the Lord. But we have to keep reminding ourselves what it is and how to find it. And I pray God will open your eyes if it's something you struggle with, so that you can really appreciate and trust your husband. Right, I hope that's uplifting to you. Blessings, and I'll catch you next week. Bye.